Toxic celebrity relationships seemed to be an all too common theme back in the day, when 90s R&B had the men simping for their women, all while serving them with a two-piece and a biscuit. From Ike Tina to Kci Mary, former Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Rison and Lisa Lopes's tumultuous and downright toxic relationship was pushed all the way to the forefront circa 1994 when Andre's $1.5 million mansion was burned to smithereens along with his most valuable prized possessions. The lying, cheating, and physical assaults were the unfortunate forces behind a majority of their arguments. And to make matters worse, his own girlfriend had been the culprit behind the mass blaze that all started with a pair of sneakers and a bathtub. A scrub is a guy who thinks he's fine and is also known as a buster. Now look, for the most part, we're pretty unbiased on this channel and give you guys the ultimatum at the end of each video, and we plan on keeping it that way, for the most part. But after some serious archive digging, we've come to the conclusion that Lisa wasn't as batshit crazy as the media painted her out to be. Again, for the most part. TLC was once on top of their A-game, despite being paid dust, quite literally, even after selling millions of records worldwide. By the time their second album came about, Crazy Sexy Cool, the girls reigned true to that title. Bombarded with reports, headlines, and all of the nosy folks out there who wanted to know the deets about Chili's relationship with their music producer, T-Bozz's health condition, and Lisa's wild and crazy antics. Coming together at an Atlanta nightclub, Rison and Lisa Lopes, both similarly loose off the goose, agreed to meet back at Andre's place. What Andre didn't know was that when he had invited Lisa to his crib, she'd bring her whole crib as well. Lisa rolled right on up to Andre's front door with all of her belongings in tow and practically moved in that exact same night. Popular yet penniless, Lisa found herself a millionaire man and was gonna stick beside him no matter what. Little did they know, this was the start to a gun-shooting, pimp-slapping, volatile relationship. In the beginning, Andre and Lisa appeared to have had the perfect relationship, and the two, despite what we know now, actually seemed pretty fit for one another. But only a few months in, things hit the fan and had taken a turn for the absolute worst. It didn't take long for massive shouting matches to take place and cheating allegations from both sides to ensue. Neither side owned up to the alleged side's sneaky linking. Andre, up till he got with Lisa, avoided negative press for the most part, and his family even tried to clink the teaspoon to Lisa's teapot, warning him to get out and get out fast. They viewed Lisa as a gold-digging R&B diva with a few hits up her sleeve. Totally exaggerating here, but a gold-digging hussy pretty much sums up what they thought about Andre's new lady. Insisting that he drop Lisa back off to the nightclub he originally picked her up at, they wanted him to spend less time focusing on Left Eye and more time focusing on his own career. Of course, that didn't happen, and he would be stuck on Lisa like a newly installed lace front. Lisa couldn't quite live the ideal lavish life she had aspired to, being in the world's most popular girl group at the time, but she could live out her dreams of being a rich man's potential wife. A Mercedes-Benz was gifted to her in replace of her beat-up truck sitting idle in his driveway, along with other expensive items. But beyond the gifts and hopeless admiration, an array of unfortunate mishaps were also present. Several miscarriages and public arguments had made their way to the media. Freedom was only a question for Lisa, who often had to ask Andre for permission before doing almost anything, especially when it came to leaving the now shared home. He became controlling and often accused Lisa of cheating, something he himself had routinely done. Sometimes with a mutual friend you probably know as the Tupac Shakur. One of the many public outbursts turned violent and almost deadly when Lisa and Andre were heard arguing in a parking lot outside of a Kroger's food market. One thing led to another, and before anyone knew it, hands went flying in all directions. Taking cover inside of the grocery market, Lisa hid out in the aisles while onlookers began to intervene and defuse the situation. but Andre was having none of it. Feeling threatened, he grabbed a gun and shot a warning shot toward the building. Police eventually showed up to the scene and arrested both Lisa and Andre after Lisa began fighting with the officers. Andre eventually bonded out after paying a $16,000 bail, as well as Lisa, whose bond was set at $1,200. If Beyoncé's Dangerously in Love was a couple, it'd be them, because incidents like this were often a common occurrence even after the two were locked up. Another time, Lisa said she walked into their home and began looking for Andre. Creeping up the steps, she noticed their bed was neatly made and headed for the guest bedroom, where Andre stood butt naked in all of his 6 feet something glory. Storming to the closet, a woman in pink lingerie like stockings was seen, bewildered that the crazy and crazy sexy cool had caught her red-handed. Andre would cheat, lie, accuse Lisa of doing the same, and repeat, and the two's relationship became a tick-for-tack, Tom and Jerry type of love. When Lisa did get permission to step outside of the house, she'd stay out all night in hopes of making Andre jealous, even though she'd spend the nights at friends' homes. One night in particular, the two had both gone out for the night separately, and Lisa had been the first to return. Hours would pass before Andre made his presence known at around 5 in the morning, and was met with a slightly tipsy and belligerent Lisa, who stepped outside of their home, meeting Andre halfway, and began throwing blows. Putting up his defense, Andre then slapped Lisa before picking her up and carrying her inside the house. She'd get dragged all the way up the steps and into their bedroom, where Andre quite literally plopped her onto the bed and sat on her in an attempt to calm her down. His 200-plus weight on Lisa's tiny frame only exacerbated the situation, and he left the premises altogether to clear his mind and leave Lisa to her ruminating thoughts and potentially harmful devices. Apparently, Lisa had suspected that Andre had been out cheating and went sneaker shopping, intentionally choosing to not buy her any, knowing it would upset her. Andre never did come back that night, preferring to stay the night at a teammate's house. But when he did eventually make it back, what he discovered was the ruins of his once $1,000,000 mansion. Gathering a bunch of his sneakers and a few knickknacks in a rage, Lisa placed the items in a bathtub before setting them on fire. And wildly enough, this hadn't been the first time she'd set his things ablaze. However, this time around, unbeknownst to Lisa, Andre had replaced the marble in the tub with a new acrylic unit. Taking her rage back outside, she then grabbed a vacuum pipe cleaner and began busting the windows out his car, and I ain't talking Jasmine Sullivan. In mid-car demolition, Lisa looked up and noticed black smoke seeping through the rooftop of Andre's mansion. But before she could do anything about it, it was too late. Fire departments quickly showed up to the scene, and Lisa turned herself into authorities the following morning while Andre returned back to what was left of his home. Despite Lisa burning down his house and everything in it, Andre stuck by Lisa through and through, escorting her to court, paying her legal fees, and even held her hand during her hearing. She was charged with felony arson and received 5 years probation in order to pay a $10,000 fine. The judge deemed her mentally unstable and sent her away to a diversionary center for 3 months in lieu of jail time. While in the facility, Lisa engaged in self-harm, carving "I love Dre" into her arm with a razor, which she eventually covered up with the self-engraved word hate. Growing up, her father was often abusive to her mother and quite rough with her and her siblings. Her siblings, on the other hand, never got into such extreme relationships. Yet Lisa had picked up on her parents' negative influences. Their relationship was crazy as is, but to add the cherry on top of this explosive Sunday, the two were set to be married after it was all said and done. After all the cheating, all of the physical violence, and even after Lisa unintentionally burnt Andre's mansion to the ground. In a case of all publicity is good publicity, the fire episode propelled TLC's career and the sales of their sophomore album, and Lisa was deemed the crazy cutie of the bunch all the way up till her untimely death. Lisa and Andre's relationship was a disastrous union brought together by lust, desire, and wealth. But through and through, it was evident that the two were both toxic for one another. Andre's abuse toward Lisa led to the demise of his home, and not too long after, his career followed suit, while her behavior toward him, on the other hand, experienced the opposite. They weren't hopelessly in love, quite the contrary. They were obsessed with each other for all the wrong reasons. Lisa came with a lot of figurative baggage, perhaps more baggage than the bag she had placed in front of Andre's house that night after meeting at the club. But whether you were in support of their relationship or not, no matter what, they'd always had each other's backs. Was Lisa in the wrong for turning Andre's home into ashes? Or do you think her actions were kinda justified? Drop a comment, let us know your thoughts and opinions down below, and stay tuned for more true celebrity stories.